Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome back to the poem of the day for today, Tuesday, September the 9th, 2025. And today is our second day in the short week series of Shakespearean sonnets that we'll be doing. If you recall from yesterday, there are 154 sonnets. I don't think I mentioned this yesterday, but it's believed that around 120 or so of them were actually written to a male lover, and whether that perspective is supposed to be kind of melded with the poet himself, or whether Shakespeare's merely putting on kind of a completely different fictitious poetic persona, is something that remains up for debate for a lot of people. And so this is the poem, the sonnet that we're going to read today is one that falls within that they believe was addressed towards a male lover. Which I think is interesting because it focuses more on what the poet believes to be a truer and stronger kind of love, namely the marriage of two minds, love between two minds. And that union then, as the poet sees it, is something that is everlasting and is something that cannot change. And the reason I would think that would be interesting if one wanted to read this through, for example, a queer lens, it seems as though it's, attempting to justify what some might, not myself, but some might suggest is, an unnatural union, something that is not, procreatively sexually compatible. And so the sonnet itself is suggesting that the thing that's truer is the thing that connects, not by biology, but by intellect, by spirit, by creativity. And this does not have to be exclusive, obviously, towards queer or same-sex relationships. This is something that any two people can feel one to another. I think it's something that can also, even though this is not the context of the sonnet, but it's something that can also bind meaningful and long-lasting friendships. And so I think it's one of the more popular and culturally lasting sonnets because it speaks to a love, but not a love that says, that might feel as kind of hallmarky as some of the other sonnets might sound. And that's all I'll say at the beginning. I have a couple reflections at the end, mainly some formal things that I noticed as I was reading that I think are interesting and complex about the sonnet. And yet it still feels as though there are parts of it that are right now kind of eluding my interpretation. So this is sonnet number 116 by William Shakespeare. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out, even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor any man ever loved. So one thing you might have heard right at the end is that the couplet has kind of an imperfect rhyme to it, right? We have proved and loved, which in terms of spelling and in terms of sight appear to rhyme, but at least in the way that I'm pronouncing it in my contemporary Midwestern accent, proved and loved, it's a bit of a slant rhyme. It's a bit of a force there. We discussed yesterday as well the structure of the Shakespearean sonnet, and in case you didn't join, I'll briefly recap that the sonnet is 14 lines long, which has 3 quatrains in it. Each quatrain, although it is one stanza altogether, a sonnet is, each quatrain has 4 lines, and so are understood as a thought unit within the sonnet, Often this will be a problem is stated, a problem is complicated, a problem is resolved, or a question is raised, perhaps, and then a couple of potential and possible answers are given within the remaining quatrains. And then there is one last thought or sort of mic drop at the end within the couplet, and the couplet rhymes together. The rhyme scheme of the rest of the sonnet then, in a Shakespearean tradition, goes A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then you end with G, G. So it has an alternating rhyme scheme. Something I might not have mentioned yesterday is that Shakespearean sonnets, like a lot of Shakespeare's plays, are also written in iambic pentameter, and that describes the meter of a line of verse. An iamb is a single unit or foot of poetry that has an unstressed syllable and then a stressed syllable following right afterward. For it to be in pentameter then means that there are 5 iambs within a line. So you have a entire verse that has 10 syllables in it, and it has a sort of might sound like a kind of galloping rhythm. Dun 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 dun. Right? One of the famous examples of this is "Methinks the lady doth protest too much." Now, obviously, you wouldn't perform the play like that because it would be dreadful to listen to, but it gives structure to where a writer might place syllables, and then it creates interesting disparities when they might violate the meter that's established within their work. It was also believed that this had sort of a masculine or a heroic connotation because the line ends then on a upbeat, right? So this is often referred to as sort of like a masculine meter or masculine rhyme to it. Now, what I think is interesting within this poem is it does follow the iambic pentameter, even in places where there might be enjambment, namely the first 2 lines. The first sentence of the poem lasts a line and a half. It is, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love," is the end of that, which I love. The placement of that line, because it's not the entire sentence, right? The entire sentence is, "Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove." But if you just look at line 2 on its own, it ends with, "Love is not love," which I think it could really be understood as a central idea to this sonnet, that love as it's understood of being, physical attraction, marriage, procreation, all of those things. This sonnet is, in a sense, attempting to redefine or deconstruct. And so I think that's a really interesting kind of happenstance at the end of the second line. But if you also look at the end of lines 6 and 8 with the rhymes shaken and taken, unless I'm pronouncing them wrong, this seems to me then that it's ending in kind of the feminine rhyme is what they would call it. It has the downbeat instead of the unstressed stressed. It's ending with stressed unstressed. It's ending with I believe that's a spondy. I'm going to need to recheck this because I often confuse that with a trochee. But it ends with shaken, rather, we don't say shaken or taken. So it ends with shaken on a downbeat in both of those lines. And it might make us wonder why. So to read a little context around, the line before goes, "Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken." And then the other example is, "It is the star to every wandering bark whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken." So the 2 D rhymes of that quatrain are on this downbeat of shaken and taken, which perhaps is showing some of the faltering, some of the trembling or the instability within these definitions of love that the writer's finding limited and exclusive. And so there's some pressure upon the form placed at the end of those lines that I think is rather interesting. And then the final quatrain is, I think, the clearest articulation of this idea that the hallmark rosy lovey-dovey love is actually the one that the speaker has some disdain for, as opposed to the marriage of minds. This quatrain reads, "Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come." That's the first two lines. Love's not time's fool is such a just rich and loaded phrase. I think on the most surface of level, it's just suggesting that love is not subject to time, and that love or relationships or attractions that are determined by or that wane with time are not aspects of love. They are ones that admit impediments, to use their lines earlier. And it says, "Though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come." And so the speaker is then following up there and saying, but those the blushings of kind of the honeymoon phase that people go through are things that come within the sickle of time, right? And so there's a sense that time is kind of reaping these things that are growing within springtime. True love, though, alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. And the edge of doom there, I think, is referring to doomsday, right? That love does not change within the brief waning of hours and the passing of the weeks, but it carries out eternally all the way until the end of time. And the final couplet then basically says, "And if I'm wrong and you can prove me wrong, then I've never written anything before and no one has ever loved anyone." And so it's setting these conditions for ways in which the ideas expressed in the poem might be wrong, but if they're actually wrong, then there's no purpose to even sort of writing or expressing these things. There is no creativity or imagination that has a subject worthy of it, and actually no one has ever been in love before. All of this is mere delusion. This is I think a stronger sonnet in terms of the intensity of its expression, perhaps, than the one yesterday. The one yesterday was much lovelier. This one has, I think, more reflection and kind of angst in it, if you will. And again, it's challenging in a sense that I've spoken about it now for about 12 minutes, and I still feel like there are several secrets within it that we could pull back out. So if there are things, as you've read, that I did not touch upon, I would love to hear some more observations as you take a look at the poem. And we'll return again tomorrow with another sonnet. So enjoy your evening, and may peace be with you all.